Okay, we want to welcome anyone that might just be tuning in. We'll have a quick word of prayer for those just tuning in. Father, we thank you so much for bringing us together on your Sabbath day. Please bless this time as we study your word. We pray that you would open our eyes to your scriptures and that you would empower us to glorify you in everything that we do. We thank you so much for the gift of Yeshua. In his name we pray, hallelujah. Today's message is entitled, Love the Stranger and Those in Need. You know, when referring to the Torah and the commandments, one thing that is highlighted, or a few things that are highlighted, is the Sabbath, the feast days, the dietary instructions, maybe the seats, but there's a lot more in the Torah. And recently in the Bible study, the topic of love for our neighbor came up, and loving the stranger and how we treat strangers. And that's actually part of the Torah too. And there's a verse in Matthew 24 and verse 12. Now this is part of Yeshua's answer to the signs of the end of the age, or the end of the world and his coming. And he says, and because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold or grow cold. And another interpretation is because of lawlessness, the growing of lawlessness causes the love of many to grow cold. And there's a lot of lawlessness going on today in this world. There's a lot of people out there that seem to be in need, but they're actually just trying to get over on you. There's a lot of people that will do you harm if you give them the opportunity. So we have to be wisdom. We have to use wisdom, but we don't want to allow the lawlessness of the world, the iniquity of the world, to cause our love to grow cold. And we still need to remember that there are instructions on how to treat the stranger and those in need. Let's look at Deuteronomy chapter 5. And verse 12. When Yahweh gave the commandment for the Sabbath, it wasn't just for his people. He wanted everybody to be blessed and to benefit from it. But we're going to glean part of this instruction about the stranger. Keep the Sabbath day to sanctify it, as Yahweh thy Elohim hath commanded thee. 6 days thou shalt labor and do all thy work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of Yahweh thy Elohim. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, nor thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thine ox, nor thine donkey, nor any of thine cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates, that thy manservant and thy maidservant may rest as well as thou. So Yahweh wanted to include everybody. He wanted to be kind to everybody in this commandment, even the animals. And in verse 15 it says, and remember that thou wast a servant or slave in the land of Egypt, and that Yahweh thy Elohim brought thee out thence through a mighty hand and by a stretched out arm. Therefore Yahweh thy Elohim commanded thee to keep the Sabbath day. So in giving this commandment, he is commanding them also to remember to be kind to other people, and remember that you used to be in the same situation. So what can we glean from that? When you see someone in need, when you see a stranger that needs your help, You see someone on the side of the road, someone at the grocery store, wherever it is, it might be an open door for you to help somebody, to be kind to somebody, and to lead somebody to salvation. And the biggest part of this is remember that you also were in bondage. Everybody in this room at some point in their life has been in need, has been in a place where you wish somebody was there to help you. You could be that person. Be looking for opportunities to love other people. And don't allow the wickedness of the world allow you to shrink back from loving somebody else, because we're commanded to do it. Let's look at Deuteronomy chapter 24 and verse 17. Thou shalt not pervert the judgment of the stranger, nor of the fatherless, nor take a widow's raiment to pledge. But thou shalt remember that thou wast a bondman in Egypt, and Yahweh thy Elohim redeemed thee thence. Therefore I command thee to do this thing. And by the way, both verses that we just read tells you to remember that you were in bondage in Egypt, and to remember that Yahweh brought you out. Some just came to mind. How did Yahweh bring them out? He sent a man. He sent Moses. And he might send you. But thou shalt remember thou wast a bondman in Egypt, and Yahweh thy Elohim redeemed thee thence. Therefore I command thee to do this thing. When thou cuttest down thine harvest in thy field, and hast forgot a sheaf in the field, thou shalt not go again to fetch it. It shall be for the stranger, for the fatherless, and for the widow, that Yahweh thy Elohim may bless thee in all the work of thine hand. If you forget part of the harvest, just leave it, so that Yahweh may bless thee in all the work of thine hands. When thou beatest thine olive tree, thou shalt not go over the boughs again. It shall be for the stranger, for the fatherless, and for the widow. When thou gatherest the grapes of thy vineyard, thou shalt not glean it afterward. It shall be for the stranger, for the fatherless, and for the widow. And again, thou shalt remember that thou wast a bondman in the land of Egypt. Therefore I command thee to do this thing. And what's interesting about this, leaving this stuff behind, the only way that they can go get it is go work. Go do some work. Get up off your feet. And it's there for you, but you got to go glean it yourself. Sometimes offering people some work is better than giving them money. And if they won't work, you need to find out why they won't work. Let's look at chapter 10 of Deuteronomy and verse 17. For Yahweh your Elohim is Elohim of Elohim, and sovereign of sovereigns, a great El, a mighty and terrible, which regardeth not persons, nor taketh reward. He does execute the judgment of the fatherless and widow, and loveth the stranger in giving him food and raiment. Love ye therefore the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Again, remember where you came from. Let's look at chapter 14 of Deuteronomy, verse 28. At the end of 3 years, thou shalt bring forth all the tithe of thine increase the same year, and shalt lay it up within thy gates. And the Levite, because he hath no part nor inheritance with thee, and the stranger, and the fatherless, and the widow, which are within thy gates, shall come and shall eat and be satisfied, that Yahweh thy Elohim may bless thee in all the work of thine hand which thou doest. So Yahweh includes all those in need to help them. This is at the end of 3 years, there was a tithing system set up for those in need. And he commands the same thing during the feast days, which we're going to read about that too. Let's look at chapter 15, verse 7. If there be among you a poor man of one of thy brethren within any of thy gates in thy land, which Yahweh thy Elohim giveth thee, thou shalt not harden thine heart, nor shut thine hand from thy poor brother, but thou shalt open thine hand wide unto him, and shalt surely lend him sufficient for his need in that which he wanteth. Beware that there be not a thought in thy wicked heart, saying, the 7th year, the year of release is at hand, and thy eye be evil against thy brother, and thou givest him nothing, and he cry unto Yahweh against thee, and it be a sin unto thee. Thou shalt surely give him, and thine heart shall not be grieved when thou givest unto him, because Yahweh loves a cheerful giver. Because that for this thing Yahweh thy Elohim shall bless thee in all thy works, and in all that thou puttest thine hand to do. He's saying when you have to give, this was during the Jubilee when they were set free, they were supposed to give to them. They were supposed to bless them on their way out. And he said, don't be grieved because you have to give. But when you give, be cheerful about it, because Yahweh is going to bless you in everything that you put your hand to do. Verse 11, for the poor shall never cease out of the land. Therefore I command thee, saying, thou shalt open thine hand wide unto thy brother, to the poor, to the needy in thy land. Let's look at chapter 16 and verse 10. And thou shalt keep the feast of weeks unto Yahweh thy Elohim with a tribute of a freewill offering of thine hand, which thou shalt give unto Yahweh thy Elohim, according as Yahweh thy Elohim hath blessed thee. And thou shalt rejoice before Yahweh thy Elohim, thou and thy son and thy daughter and thy manservant and thy maidservant and the Levite that is within thy gates, and the stranger and the fatherless and the widow that are among you, in the place which Yahweh thy Elohim hath chosen to place his name there. And thou shalt remember that thou wast a bondman in Egypt, and thou shalt observe to do these statutes. You know, we're a blessed congregation. We come together every week and we have a big feast. And there's a lot of people in our area that need salvation. They need people with our understanding to go to them and tell them how to be delivered out of the situation that they're in. And this verse right here says, when you come together to feast, bring in those in need, your manservant, your maidservant, the Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, the widow, and let them all come and feast with you. Let's look at Leviticus 19. And verse 9. When you reap the harvest of your land, thou shalt not wholly reap the corners of thy field, neither shalt thou gather the gleanings of thy harvest. And thou shalt not glean thy vineyard, neither shalt thou gather every grape of thy vineyard. Thou shalt leave them for the poor, the stranger. I am Yahweh your Elohim. Let's look at verse 33, same chapter. And if a stranger sojourn with thee in your land, you shall not vex him. But the stranger that dwelleth with you shall be unto you as one born among you. And thou shalt love him as thyself. For you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am Yahweh your Elohim. You shall do no unrighteousness in judgment, in meat yard, in weight, or in measure. Just balances, just weights, a just ephah, and a just hin shall you have. I am Yahweh your Elohim, which brought you out of the land of Egypt. Therefore shall you observe all my statutes and all my judgments, and do them. I am Yahweh. Let's look at chapter 23 and verse 22. And when you reap the harvest of your land, thou shalt not make clean riddance of the corners of thy field when thou reapest, neither shalt thou gather any gleanings of thy harvest. Thou shalt leave them unto the poor and to the stranger. I am Yahweh your Elohim. Okay, so let's look at Genesis chapter 18. Starting in verse 1. And Yahweh appeared unto him in the plains of Mamre, and he sat in the tent door in the heat of the day, and he lifted up his eyes and looked, and lo, 3 men stood by him. And when he saw them, he ran to meet them from the tent door, and bowed himself toward the ground, and said, Yahweh, if now I have found favor in thy sight, pass not away, I pray thee, from thy servant. Let a little water, I pray you, be fetched, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. And I will fetch a morsel of bread, and comfort ye your hearts. After that you shall pass on, for therefore are you come to your servant. And they said, So do as thou hast said. And Abraham hasted unto the tent unto Sarah, and said, Make ready quickly 3 measures of fine meal, knead it, and make cakes upon the hearth. And Abraham ran unto the herd, and fetched a calf, tender and good, and gave it unto a young man, and he hasted to dress it. And he took butter and milk, and the calf which he had dressed, and set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree, and they did eat. And they so I just thought it was interesting that the way he invited his guests in here, and we're going to see that theme repeated through Scripture. As a matter of fact, in the next chapter, Lot has 2 guests. Chapter 19, verse 1. And there came 2 angels to Sodom at even, and Lot sat in the gate of Sodom, and Lot, seeing them, rose up to meet them. He bowed himself with his face toward the ground, and he said, Behold now, my sovereigns, turn in, I pray you, into your servant's house, and tarry all night, and wash your feet, and you shall rise up early, and go on your ways. And they said, Nay, but we will abide in the street all night. And he pressed upon them greatly, and they turned in unto him, and he entered into his house, and he made them a feast, and did bake unleavened bread, and they did eat. Let's look at Ruth chapter 1, right after Judges. And as we read a little bit from Ruth, we're going to see a little bit of the commandments taking place that we just read. We'll start in Ruth 1 and verse 16. And for anybody that's not familiar, Naomi had 2 sons. Both of them were married. Her husband had died. Her sons died. She was left with 2 daughter-in-laws. She told them to return back to their land. They were from Moab. One of them returned, but Ruth decided to stay. That's a little recap. In verse 16, Ruth says, Entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy Elohim my Elohim. Where thou diest will I die, and there will I be buried. Yahweh do so to me, and more also, if aught but death part thee and me. So here, Ruth, not a native-born Israelite, says, I want to stay with you. I want your people to be my people, and I want your Elohim to be my Elohim. That's the grafting in process. Let's look at chapter 2 and verse 1. And Naomi had a kinsman of her husband, a mighty man of wealth, of the family of Elimelech, and his name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabitess said unto Naomi, Let me now go to the field and glean ears of corn after him in whose sight I shall find grace. And she said unto her, Go, my daughter. And she went and came and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and her hap was to light on a part of the field belonging unto Boaz, who was of the kindred of Elimelech. And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem, and said unto the reapers, Yahweh be with you. And they answered him, Yahweh bless thee. Then said Boaz unto his servant that was set over the reapers, Whose damsel is this? And the servant that was set over the reapers answered and said, It is the Moabitish damsel that came back with Naomi out of the country of Moab. And she said, I pray you, let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves. So she came and hath continued even from the morning until now, that she tarried a little in the house. Then said Boaz unto Ruth, Hearest thou not, my daughter? Go not to glean in another field, neither go from hence, but abide here fast by my maidens. Let thine eyes be on the field that they do reap, and go thou after them. Have I not charged the young men that they shall not touch thee? And when thou art athirst, go unto the vessels, and drink of that which the young men have drawn. Then she fell on her face, and bowed herself to the ground, and said unto him, Why have I found grace in thine eyes, that thou shouldest take knowledge of me, seeing I am a stranger? And Boaz answered and said unto her, It hath fully been showed me all that thou hast done unto thy mother-in-law since the death of thine husband, and how thou hast left thy father and thy mother, and the land of thy nativity, and art come unto a people which thou knewest not heretofore or before. Yahweh recompense thy work, and a full reward be given thee of Yahweh, Elohim of Israel, under whose wings thou art come to trust. Then she said, Let me find favor in thy sight, my master, for thou hast comforted me, and for that thou hast spoken friendly unto thine handmaid, though I be not like unto one of thine handmaidens. And Boaz said unto her, At mealtime come thou hither, and eat of the bread, and dip thy morsel in the vinegar. And she sat beside the reapers, and she reached her parched corn, and she did eat, and was sufficed, and left. And when she was risen up to glean, Boaz commanded his young men, saying, Let her glean even among the sheaves, and reproach her not. And let fall also some of the handfuls of purpose for her, and leave them, that she may glean them, and rebuke her not. So he's actually going above and beyond what the Torah says. He's saying, make sure you leave extra behind for her. And let fall also some of the handfuls of purpose for her, and leave them, that she may glean them, and rebuke her not. So she gleaned in the field until even, and beat out that which she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. And she took it up, and went into the city, and her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned, and she brought forth and gave to her that she had reserved after she was sufficed. And her mother-in-law said unto her, Where hast thou gleaned today? And where wroughtest thou? Blessed be he that did take knowledge of thee. And she showed her mother-in-law with whom she had wrought, and said, The man's name with whom I wrought today is Boaz. And Naomi said unto her, Daughter-in-law, blessed be he of Yahweh, who hath not left off his kindness to the living and to the dead. And Naomi said unto her, The man is near of kin unto us, one of our next kinsmen. And Ruth, the Moabitess, said, He said unto me also, Thou shalt keep fast by my young men until they have ended all my harvest. And Naomi said unto Ruth, her daughter-in-law, It is good, my daughter, that thou go out with his maidens, that they meet thee not in any other field. So she kept fast by the maidens of Boaz to glean unto the end of barley harvest and of the wheat harvest, and dwelt with her mother-in-law. And the story goes on that he redeemed her and took her as a wife. They had a child, and that child became the grandfather of King David. Let's look at Luke chapter 7 and verse 36. And one of the Pharisees desired him that he would eat with him, and he went into the Pharisee's house and sat down to meat. And behold, a woman in the city which was a sinner, when she knew that Yeshua sat at meat in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster box of ointment, and stood at his feet behind him, weeping, and began to wash his feet with tears, and did wipe them with the hairs of her head, and kissed his feet, and anointed them with ointment. Now when the Pharisee which had bidden him saw it, he spake within himself, saying, This man, if he were a prophet, would have known who and what manner of woman this is that touches him, for she is a sinner. And Yeshua answering, now, interesting to note that the man spake within himself. And Yeshua was speaking back to his inner voice. Simon, I have somewhat to say unto thee. And he saith, Master, say on. There was a certain creditor which had 2 debtors. The one owed 500 pence, and the other 50. And when they had nothing to pay, he frankly forgave them both. Tell me, therefore, which of them will love him most? Simon answered and said, I suppose that he to whom he forgave the most. And he said unto him, Thou hast rightly judged. And he turned to the woman and said unto Simon, Seest thou this woman? I entered into thine house. Thou gavest me no water for my feet, which was a common custom for guests. Thou gavest me no water for my feet, but she has washed my feet with tears and wiped them with the hairs of her head. Thou gavest me no kiss, but this woman, since the time I came in, hath not ceased to kiss my feet. My head with oil thou didst not anoint, but this woman hath anointed my feet with ointment. Wherefore I say unto thee, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. But to whom little is forgiven, the same loveth little. This religious person did not have hospitality and was being a hypocrite. And Yeshua was pointing out that this so-called sinner had greater hospitality than you. And because she had a lot of sin in her life, but had been forgiven, her love was that much greater. And there's so many people out there in this world that need to know about forgiveness, that need to know about salvation. And we need to be looking for opportunities for that open door. And we have literature, we have things that you can give someone that, you know, they can go back and search the scriptures for themselves. If you're not an eloquent speaker, you can pass on information. You can pray for someone. And just praying for someone can make a lasting impact on them. And they might come looking for the truth. They'll remember that you prayed for them and you gave them something on where they can go to get more truth. Let's look at Luke chapter 10 and verse 25. And behold, a certain lawyer stood up and tempted him, saying, Master, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? And he said unto him, What is written in the law? How readest thou? And he answering said, Thou shalt love Yahweh thy Elohim with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy strength, with all thy mind, and thy neighbor as thyself. And he said unto him, Thou hast answered right. This do, and thou shalt live. But he, willing to justify himself, said unto Yeshua, And who is my neighbor? So obviously this man knew that there were neighbors that he wasn't being kind to, or he wasn't being obedient to loving thy neighbor part. So he wanted to justify himself by clarifying, well, who is the neighbor? So Yeshua gives him an illustration to define who your neighbor is. And Yeshua answering said, A certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell amongst thieves, which stripped him of his raiment and wounded him and departed, leaving him half dead. This is a person in need. When you see this person in need, which of the passerbys are you going to be? And by chance there came down a certain priest, a religious person, that way. And when he saw him, he passed by on the other side, didn't want to have anything to do with him. And likewise a Levite, another religious person, when he was at the place, came and looked on him and passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan, now the Samaritans didn't have dealings with the Israelites. There was hostility. The Israelites considered the Samaritans to be half-breeds. This Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. So are you going to be the person that sees someone in need? Are you going to have compassion? He went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring in oil and wine, and set him on his own beast, and brought him to an inn, and took care of him. And on the morrow, when he departed, he took out 2 pence, and gave them to the host, and said unto him, Take care of him, and whatsoever thou spendest more, when I come again, I will repay thee. Which now of these 3 thinkest thou wast neighbor unto him that fell amongst the thieves? And he said, He that showed mercy on him. So the answer to the question, who is your neighbor? Those that are in need are your neighbor. It doesn't matter what bloodline they came from. You can be a neighbor to anyone that is in need. And imagine this act of kindness in today's context. This act of kindness, you leave somebody a card, a pamphlet, a Bible tract, something that when they remember that act of kindness, they know where to get the truth from. Let's look at chapter 6, verse 37. We've got a few more sections here. 6:37. Judge not that you shall not be judged. Condemn not that you shall not be condemned. Forgive, and you shall be forgiven. Give, and it shall be given unto you. Good measure, pressed down and shaken together, and running over, shall men give into your bosom. For with the same measure that you meet withal, it shall be measured to you again. With the measure that you use, it's going to be measured back to you. And if you give, if you bless other people, he's going to give it back, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. Matthew chapter 25. Starting in verse 31. When the Son of Man shall come in his glory and all the holy angels with him, then shall he sit upon the throne of his glory. And before him shall be gathered all nations. He shall separate them one from another, as a shepherd divides his sheep from the goats. And he shall set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. Then shall the king say unto them on his right hand, Come, ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungered, and you gave me meat. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. Naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came unto me. Then shall the righteous answer him, saying, Master, when saw we thee a hungered, and fed thee, or thirsty, and gave thee drink? When saw we thee a stranger, and took thee in, or naked, and clothed thee? Or when saw we thee sick, or in prison, and came unto thee? And the king shall answer and say unto them, Verily I say unto you, insomuch as you have done it unto the least of these my brethren, you have done it unto me. And of course the other group was the opposite. And all of the situations that he just named, that's the harvest. Yeshua looked upon the crowds, and he said that they looked like sheep that had no shepherd. That means they have nobody to teach them. And he said, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. And when Yeshua returns, he's not dividing the sheep from the goats based off of your doctrine and your understanding. He's dividing the sheep from the goats on how you treated other people. Proverbs 19, verse 7. Actually, let's go to 11:25. Proverbs 11:25. Sorry. The liberal soul shall be made fat, and he that waters shall be watered also himself. And chapter 22, verse 9. Proverbs 22:9. He that hath a bountiful eye shall be blessed, for he gives of his bread to the poor. Ladies and gentlemen, don't allow the wickedness of the world to cause you to shrink back from those in need. Be careful. Be on guard. Protect yourself. There are people out there that will take advantage of the situation. Pray about it. At the least, leave someone some information. Point them in the right direction. Pray for them. And an act of kindness will go a long way. Y'all be blessed.